Hi and welcome to this anime-inspired animation tutorial. In this tutorial you will learn how to animate a stylized run in Maya.
My name is Amedeo Beretta and I am a 3D character animator with a generalist background. I started working in 3D CGI in the year 2003 and alongside production I kept training students and professionals ever since.
By the end of this course you will be able to animate with confidence a stylized looking run in a short amount of time and supported by a solid workflow. We will start by understanding the story behind the run, and then we will learn how to evaluate, import and manage video references coming from existing animation. At that stage we will be able to design the key poses, mirror them and iterate until satisfied. After that we will make the character run through space and polish the animation. The course runs in Maya, but the principles are applicable to any software. I designed this course for animators who are familiar with the very basics of the workflow, but struggle to deliver good posing, polishing and locomotion. If you are interested, just hop aboard and follow along.
Where's the cat? Ow!
Since there are many different types of runs, you have to decide which type of run you want to animate before even opening the 3D software. So you need to start collecting references. The more references you will find, and the more informed you will be about the dynamics of a run. In this tutorial we're going to animate one that has a bit more of an anime vibe, that comes across as a bit more stylized, while in another course I am recording, I will demonstrate how to animate another one which will come across as a bit more realistic. In fact, we will base it on live action references. By the way, on YouTube there are several collections of anime runs, and if you really look through a lot of feature films, animes and even TV series, you will find a very good variety of examples of runs, and you can just use them as a base for you to learn. For the stylized type of run, we are going to have a look at Toshiyuki Inoue Millennium Actress's run, which I think looks really nice, and I think it poses some unique challenges, one of which being that the original animation is done on twos, that is, one drawing every 2 frames, which is something that comes across as very nice looking in 2D, but needs to be studied in 3D. You can download video clips from YouTube using a YouTube downloader, and you can convert them to image sequences. Make sure you convert them to image sequences that run at the frame per second you need to have in Maya. By default, Maya run at 24 frames per second, but in practice it depends on the project. On TV projects you often animate on 25 frames per second, while on games you often animate on 30 frames per second. For the purpose of this tutorial we're going to animate at 24 frames per second. Anyhow, you can use the links in the resources to download the frame sequences of these references. While you're searching for references, it is a very good idea to start considering the story of a run. So let's see together the story of a run. The story of a run is the story of a locomotion cycle that is designed to propel the body forward at a speed which is superior to that of a normal walk. One thing that happens in a run that does not happen in a walk is that in a run there is always one pose in which both feet are off the floor. In practice your character will be flying, although for a very short time. Without wings it's kind of difficult to fly. So let's start checking the poses. So in a run, like in a walk, you have a contact pose, which is a pose in which the foot first touches the floor. This pose can be with the foot planted on the floor already, or with the foot touching with the heel and the tip up. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. The contact leg tends to be almost straight, if not entirely straight, and the arms are opposing the legs. So if the right leg is forward, it will be the left arm which is forward. After the contact pose, you will slide naturally into a down where the body will lower. If you track the belt of this footage, you see that the belt lowers, and then you will go past the passing pose, and again you will kick off and then be in the up pose again. Now the issue with this kind of locomotion is that it happens at a very high speed. So if you think of it, we have a contact pose and just 2 frames later we have something that looks like a passing pose, and then again 1 frame later we have something that looks like a kickoff pose, after which we go in 2 frames into the up and then again into the contact. The speed of the run depends on what the character is doing. The character might be jogging
jogging, in which case the run may be a lot slower than this run we are looking at right now. So if we have a look at this run from the movie Millennium Actress, you will spot that the traditional approach to a run is fairly methodic. It starts with a contact pose with the foot on the floor and the other foot still being behind, the arms are swinging opposite the foot, so if the left arm is forward, it will be the right foot that is forward. And then from the contact pose, we go down into a down/passing pose. The leg which just contacted is going to bend and the weight is going to lower and the back leg is going to start moving forward, you see, while the arms are counter swinging. From this kind of down/passing pose, we move straight into the kickoff pose. The kickoff pose is the pose in which the foot which just contacted is leaving the ground. It's the last frame in which this foot is on the ground, while the opposite foot has gone past this foot and is preparing for an up pose and then a contact pose. In the meantime, the body is being propelled forward and upwards. The arms are still swinging to help. We can call this the kickoff pose. It's the pose we need in order to propel our body forward and a bit higher up. You can't possibly run if you don't kick off first. From the kickoff we go into the up, you see there. In the up, both feet are off the floor, so there's no contact with the ground whatsoever. The arms still swinging to oppose the motion of the legs, and the main body action is forward and a tiny bit high, so this kind of vector, I suppose. And then after that, we start all over again with a contact. So we go back to the contact pose, this time with the other leg. So we have the left leg in the air and the right leg is about to recover and go forward, while the arms are still opposing. The weight will go down between the up pose and the down pose. Not so much as you would expect, because the main motion of the run being forward, you do not want to waste a lot of energy by going up and down with the body. There will be certainly up and down, but the quicker the run, the less up and down you have. Also, depending on what you're trying to do, the body will be more or less leaning forward. In a very quick run, the body will tend to be leaning forward quite a lot if you think of it, and in a run that needs to decelerate, the body will start to lean backward instead. So for instance, in this shot, the girl is supposed to change direction, so while she's coming from this direction, she will need to decelerate and change direction. And you will notice that as she does so, the weight starts to move against the motion of the run. It starts to lean backward because she's trying to control the change of direction. In fact, of course, spoiler alert, she will fall in this. It's very interesting again to notice how this animation was done on twos. That is, there is only one drawing every 2 frames. You see, I'm moving the timeline, but again, the drawing changes only every 2 frames. In 3D, by default, we animate every single frame. And you will see that this will create a difference between the animation we see in this reference, for instance, and the one we will animate, which will look a lot smoother, but also a bit more diluted, in fact. The poses won't feel as strong as those you have in 2D animation. And my opinion is that happens because they don't stay on screen as long as they do in the 2D traditional animation. So as far as traditional poses are concerned, we identified a contact pose, a down/passing pose, kickoff. You can't run without a kickoff. You can't push. You can't jump without a kickoff, and an up pose. And then we start again. So again, contact, down, kickoff, up. There is another approach that does run by doing first the contact, then the down, and the kickoff is indeed the passing pose. In our case, we are going to consider the kickoff just a kickoff, because from a storytelling perspective, the kickoff is the one frame we need to be able to push the character forward. We can't push it forward, as I said, without the kickoff. So we are going to merge the down and the passing pose into a single pose. A good video that explains the difference between the 2 different approaches of posing is this one by Alan Becker, Animating Run Cycle, in which he goes through the traditional approach with contact down, passing and up pose, and another one which instead is based on contact, passing, kickoff and up pose. For the purpose of this tutorial, we're going to use a contact down/passing, kickoff and up approach. The first thing we want to do once into Maya is to create a project. So we go into File, Project Window, we need to specify a new name,
I will call this run_t, stands for tutorial in my case, and you want to specify the path you want to store this project into. The names are unimportant, but they need to be clear and something that you can easily remember. I will click on accept and a new project is created and set. If you want to double check, you can go to your folder, you can find the tutorial folder that I've just created, run_t, you see that? You can click, and in there you will find all the subfolders that are typical to a Maya project. The indication that this is really a folder of a Maya project comes from the workspace.mel file. You see this file, you know you're looking at the Maya project. Then we need the rig. Find the rig file that comes with the resources of this project. The version of the rig is not so important, to be honest. In general, the tutorial will work with whichever version of the same character. I'm just going to copy this rig file. So into the scenes folder, I create a folder named rig. That's where I will store my rig, and I will paste the rig in there. So now if you think of it, in my project folder, I have a scenes folder that will contain the animation file, and into that I will also have a folder named rig that will contain the rig itself, so that I keep things nice and organized. Now let's reference that rig into the scene. I will go into File, Create Reference, and the beauty of it is that the Create Reference window opens up already in the scenes folder, which already in itself is a good advantage because it spares you some clicks. I will go into rig and I will grab Rocket Girl rig. The version is not so important. Rocket Girl will load, and please notice that we know it's a referenced item because of the little blue diamond in the outliner. If you want to know more about why setting the project is important and why referencing your rig is important as well, please check the link to the respective videos on my YouTube channel. In there, everything is explained. And now we are ready to save our first animated scene, regardless to the fact that there is no animation in it. So I will hit Ctrl S to save my file, and I will call the file capital Anim. It's a token that stands for animation, of course. I will call this thing Stylized Run, and then I will add a splitter underscore 001, that's the version of the run, and then begin, that's the comment. So this way files will be organized first by the token of the type of file, animation, then the token of the type of animation, stylized run, then the version, and finally the comment, which is relatively important. It's better to save the file as a Maya ASCII because it's easier to recover data from Maya ASCIIs than it is from Maya binary. The tutorial will work even if you save as a Maya binary. I will click on Save As, and now I'm ready to animate. With the rig in the scene, it's time for us to start thinking about references, the video references we will use to inform our animation. And remember, we were looking at this clip from Millennium Actress as a way for us to start animating something that looked a bit more anime-like. So indeed, we are going to employ this very clip. It's worth reminding people that you can download YouTube clips with a YouTube downloader plugin that you can install in a browser. Also, if you need to edit your clips or export them as frame sequences, you can use a software like Shotcut, which is free and open source. Amongst the assets included in this tutorial, you will find a file named animerun.zip. That archive contains an image sequence with the frames we would like to employ as a reference for our animation. You will see that we won't be able to do exactly like they do in the anime for a number of reasons, but nevertheless it will provide us with good support. Once extracted, the animerun folder will appear, and we will need to move this folder into the source images of our project. So we'll just cut this folder here, and once we are into the Maya project we've just created, you will find a folder named Source Images. That folder contains all the textures that Maya needs to operate within the context of your project. So we double click on it, and we paste in there the animerun folder. In the animerun folder, you will find all the frames. In Maya, we make sure we are looking at the scene through the perspective view, and from the perspective view viewport, we go under View, the menu on the top left side of the UI, and go Image Plane, Import Image. Maya will ask for the path, and incidentally, but not so much, Maya is already looking into the source images folder, so we can go into animerun, grab whichever frame, it doesn't matter which frame you grab, just double click on it or click on open, there you have it. You have your frame sequence, except it doesn't play. That yellow mark around the image plane means the image plane is currently selected, which means that if you hit Ctrl A like alpha on your keyboard, you will open up the attribute editor for that image plane. And in there you see that the image plane has a setting that says use image sequence. If I tick that box,
Then the image plane will start to play, and as I scrap the timeline with the left mouse button, you see that I see the animation playing. That will make it a lot easier for us to work with. However, one thing you will notice is that the animation doesn't really start with the scene we need, so I will need to make the timeline long, like for instance 500 frames, and I will scroll until I find the sequence. There you go, you see that the first pose that we identified earlier on, which was the contact, happens on frame 251. So we would really like this frame to fall on frame 1 of our timeline. In the attribute editor of the image plane, you will find frame offset. If you input a negative number like -1, you see that we see the previous frame. That means that the timeline of the image plane is moving to the right of the timeline of Maya. If we type in a positive number, like, I don't know, 5 for instance, you see that we see a frame which was supposed to happen in the future. That means that the timeline is shifting left. That means that if I input 251 in here, I'm going to move the whole image plane sequence 251 frames to the left, meaning it should end up at frame 1 with the contact pose. And there you have it. In fact, if you go back to frame 1 now, you will see that we have the contact pose. If you accidentally lose selection of the image plane and for whichever reason you can't select it anymore, you can go and watch the viewport from the same camera you attached the image plane to, in this case the perspective, then go under View, Image Plane Attributes, and you select the image plane you want to work with, and there you have it. If the attribute editor does not show up, you hit Ctrl Alpha, Ctrl A again, and the attribute editor will show up. There you go. Once the image plane is happily in the scene, it is time for us to start the actual animation. Now, one of the problems you have when you animate is that you may accidentally select the image plane as you work or other items which are in the scene and which you do not need. Now you see, as I move the perspective away, the character disappears behind the image plane. That sucks. So maybe we can go under View, Image Plane Attributes, and find the image plane we need, which I can maybe rename as Anime Run Image Plane. And once the image plane is selected, you click on the channel box on the top right side of the screen. You see there's a tab named Channel Box, and there you want to grab the depth attribute with the left mouse button. Once you middle mouse drag in the viewport, you're increasing the value of the depth. You don't see it, but you're moving the image plane away. And now you see, even if I move the camera away, nothing happens there and the character is always visible. If I set the depth to 1, for instance, you see the character becomes invisible. And as I increase the value, then suddenly the character starts to become invisible because the image plane is traveling far away from the character. Maya is also counterscaling the image plane so that you don't feel like it's moving away and you will still see it. Speaking of which, once the image plane is far away, we have a very big number on screen, you can maybe grab size X and Y and middle mouse drag them so that you see the character we need to look at a bit better. And you can also use offset Y to have the character a bit more centered or maybe a bit more offset so that we can keep the 3D character in the scene. That's going to make it a lot easier for us to operate. So usually we set the selection mask in Maya to be able to select only the animation controls. The selection mask you see in here has all the boxes highlighted in blue, meaning that Maya will let you select whichever thing you want to select in the viewport, regardless of the type of item. If you do not see the selection mask, this is the way the bar should appear to you. Do not worry too much. You will see that this bar starts with a drop-down menu on the top left corner, and as you scroll to the right, there are several icons, and then there are 3 icons with a cursor and different symbols. Next to them, there's a vertical line with a triangle. Click on it, that will expand the selection mask. Now in the selection mask, remember, we only want to be able to select curves, the controls that we operate to animate the rig. So we click on the little triangle next to the selection mask, we set all objects to off. And now you see all the squares are not highlighted anymore, and when we drag a selection in Maya, we can't select anything from the viewport, which is useful to a certain degree. However, we want to select the curves, so if you click on the curves icon in the selection mask, this zigzagging line there with the 2 vertices at both ends, you click on it and now you will be able to select only the animation curves. I know that it seems like I'm selecting geometry, but that's something that has to do with the way Maya highlights a hierarchy. Once we have set up Maya to operate in a way that is friendly to an animator, it's time for us to set up the rig to behave in such a way as to make it easy to animate and spline this animation. The first thing I want to check is the legs, of course, and remember the legs are by default operating in inverse kinematics. That means that you grab the end of a hierarchy, and by translating it around, the hierarchy self-adjusts. However, you notice how when I rotate the foot, the pole vector, this little control in front of the knee, is also moving. Regardless of which rig you're operating, my suggestion for the purpose of this exercise is to make sure that the pole vector is independent from the foot orientation. Otherwise, as you rotate the foot, you will also rotate the knee one-to-one, which is not really the way it works in real life. To do that, you go back into the channel box on the top right corner of the UI. You will see the tab there. You click on the channel box, and usually, regardless of the rig, you should find in the pole vector control that there is a channel called local parent space, and if we go and check, there is parent space, and by default it's set to foot, but we really want to set it to world, so that now you will see that the right foot will not influence anymore the position of the pole vector. We can move the pole vector a bit more forward, while on the left hand side, if we rotate the foot, the pole vector is still moving with it. So we want to grab that pole vector as well, the left hand side pole vector, and set it to world so that it's not affected by the rotations of the foot. Another thing that you want to check is in this animation, and you can tell it from the pose, there will be a lot of twisting of the chest left and right, but you see as I rotate the chest left and right, the hands are staying there, which is a bit cumbersome in my opinion because it forces us to counter animate the hands every time there is a movement with the chest. This is because the hands by default are set to work in IK, just like the feet, IK or inverse kinematics, while if we could keep them in FK, forward kinematics, maybe they would follow the chest, but we will see that we will still need to do a few steps to make them work the way we like. In here I will animate using FK, forward kinematics, but it's down to your preference. The advantage of FK is that it's much easier to track the arcs, and we will see why in a locomotion cycle. The disadvantage is that you don't have precise positioning of the hand with a single control. But for the stuff we are doing here, FK, in my opinion, is a bit more suitable. Then when you become more expert, you can use IK to do locomotion as well. Usually, a lot of rigs, they have a cross marker or a gear marker near the wrists or near the root of the rig. In this case, there is a little key in here. You see this control with a line and a circle. These two controls are your IK to FK switcher. And in fact, if you go into the channel box in the top right corner of the screen, you find IK to FK. If you select with the left mouse button the name of the channel and then you drag with the middle mouse button in the timeline, you see you can switch the value from 0 to 1, where 1 is FK and 0 is IK. So we want them to be both set to FK. Again, the attributes may be named differently in another rig, but the function will stay the same. Also, in some rigs, the IK to FK goes between 0 to 10, and maybe 10 means FK and 0 means IK. The philosophy is the same, the values are changing, don't worry too much. Now, as we rotate the chest, you will find that the arms are following one-to-one, which is a bit better, but if we are going to bend the chest this way, you see that the arms are going to behave like the wings of an airplane. That's not really handy. I would really like the arms to stay globally oriented, and that's usually called global orientation or parent space set to world. It will have a different name based on whichever rig you're opening, but usually is called local, global, parent space, parent switch, switch space, space switch. It depends on the rig. In some rigs, you can find that in the shoulder control up there, you see here, but right now in here we only have rotation and translation. In some other rigs, you can find it on the IK to FK controller, and if I grab both the IK to FK controllers, you see that there's something called FK rotation space, and it's set to shoulder. If we click on it and we set it to world, now as I rotate the chest, the arms should stay global. You see they do. That seems rather handy if you ask me. Now another thing that happens when you run or locomote is that the head stays global so that it can aim at the direction of the motion and avoid obstacles, and also assess the obstacles that may arise as you locomote forward. By default, a lot of rigs, they are set to local rotation, so the head is moving one-to-one with the chest, which is rather inconvenient for the kind of animation we do, because as we twist the chest, you see that we will have to counter animate the head to stay straight. Usually on the neck and on the head, or on both, you will find a local to global converter of sorts. In this case, it's on the head, it seems, and the rotation space of the head is set to neck. We set it to world, and now you will find out that as we rotate the chest, the head stays global, which makes it a lot more flexible in terms of workflow. We can even set it to torso and see how that works. I don't know if that works. Let's see. That works. I think torso will be a good setting so that we can rotate the character around. Yes, I will set it to torso in this case. Now we have set the rig to operate in such a way that it will be easier to animate what we need to animate. And usually this is one step you have to do before you start the animation. Ask yourself which way will be the easiest to operate this machine, which is the rig, in order for you to finish this animation better and earlier. Let's do the contact pose. So I'll grab the foot that I lifted earlier on for the demo. I will zero out its values, and it's the right foot, and I will move it forward like the right foot of the girl, and then I will move the left foot backward like the foot of the girl, and I will raise it. To rotate, scale, and translate, you hit E to rotate, W to translate, R to scale. So W, E, R. W translates, E rotates, R scales. Now you see that my axes are not aligned to the foot. To change the axis of orientation, you just press down the relevant shortcut, so W and left mouse button, and a marking menu shows up. It's the equivalent of the pie menus in Blender, and in there you can decide which axis you want to operate. You see, so I can go world, and that axis is oriented like the world, and I can go object, and that axis is oriented like the objects. There are advantages and disadvantages to all systems, of course. For rotation, the same. E and left mouse button, you can pick different axes. For now, we'll stay on object. I'm going to rotate left foot backward, and I'm going to maybe lower the root a little bit so that the leg doesn't get stretched. You see, you will notice that the leg stays stretched, and then at a certain point it snaps, and then at a certain point it snaps in place and it bends a little. We want to just have it snapped in place and not totally stretched. That's because as we transition between stretched and in place, there will be a snap, which is usually called an IK pop, and that is usually considered the mark of a junior animator. Because junior animators may pay less attention towards fixing these kind of issues, so in general, you don't want to have those issues in your showreels, because the presence of these issues reduce the perceived quality of your work. So I'm going to lower the root ever so slightly, rotate it forward. If I check the character I'm looking at, it's slightly rotated forward. And I'm not really going to animate the rotation of the root in this animation. I'm just going to use it as a general orientation, but I'm not going to rotate it, because remember, every time I rotate it, I will also rotate the head, which I don't want to do. Then if the right leg went forward, it means that the right arm will go backward. Now it's really interesting to notice that some rigs have two controllers for the shoulder, and this is one such rig. So for the sake of this tutorial, we are only ever going to use the smaller controller, unless otherwise specified. So try to make a mental note of it, and we are never going to operate this guy, just the smaller one. So the thing in here is I could just, you see, move back, but it starts to look a bit like a different kind of run. I mean, if you move the arm back, what happens in real life is that the chest will swing back a little bit, you see, to help the arm. And if you check the angle of the arm from the top, you see how much more natural it is when you swing the chest back. That's a lot more natural. Speaking of which, if the chest swings in one direction, then the pelvis will swing in the opposite direction to help the contact with the floor of the leg. And that is going to make the leg work a lot better, and also it's going to allow us to lift the root quite a lot more if you think of it. So there you go. Now I really need to rotate the arm forward. And now if you want to bend the elbow for the sake of this tutorial, my suggestion is always to use only the anatomical axis of the elbow, because you know, most rigs let you do this, but that's not the way elbows work. So the suggestion I have for you as beginners is first bend the elbow following the anatomically correct axis, and then if you want to change the position of the hand, rotate from the shoulder control. That's the way anatomy works, really. So I'm going to move up the arm in there, and more or less that's it. But you see that we need to raise the head in there, and maybe move the neck, and maybe rotate the neck a little bit more forward. There you go. So that's my pose in there. It's still not looking exactly like the pose we had in there, but it's pretty similar if you think of it. You have to keep in mind that when you animate for a shot in a movie, you may start from a locomotion cycle in 3D, but then you need to adapt it to the scene. So in here, the image sequence we're using as a reference has a lot of variations. It's not just a locomotion cycle. So we are going to use it as a source of information, but we are not really going to be able to do exactly that kind of animation because we are not animating a shot per se. Maybe in another tutorial. Now for the fingers, you will see that some rigs have some controls that rotate the whole finger around, and then inside the channel box you will find a curl attribute that curl the fingers. I don't often use this kind of stuff for close-ups because these controls, they tend to curl the fingers uniformly, which doesn't really happen in real life. If you want to have more control, my suggestion is to enable the tweak controls, which you may usually find already visible, or in the channel box of the main controller you will find something called finger tweak maybe, or phalanx control depending on the rig, and I can set that to on, and you see a lot more controls will appear, and we can use those controls instead. I will just liberally select all the controllers and control deselect the stuff that I don't need, including the main controllers of the fingers, which I don't plan to use, and this way I should only operate the finger controllers, which I can just bend down. You see that, I accidentally selected the cupping control in there. I don't want to select the thumb for now, so I will deselect the thumb. Again, control left mouse button to deselect, and now I'm going to just create a fist pose in there. Now, one thing that happens with the fist pose is that, well, I don't think the last phalanx is rotating nearly as much, so I'm going to counter rotate those a little bit, and then in a fist you don't see the gap between the fingers, but in some rigs you will get the gap anyway. In here there's a bit of a proportion issue. The pinky is actually longer than the ring finger, which is a bit strange. So one thing you can do easily is you can just move the fingers closer to one another. Even if there is a bit of intersection, don't worry, this is not a close-up of the hand and it's always going to be in motion, so it's more important for it not to have gaps than for it not to have intersections. So you see, you have to gauge also the context in which you're operating to understand whether an intersection is a problem or not. I'm going to stick out the index a little bit more because in general in a fist the index tends to stick out a little bit more, and there you go, I have my pose. Another thing that happens in fists is that the tip of the fingers tend to point at the base of the wrist in there, so I'm going to maybe rotate these guys ever so slightly so that they point at the center of the wrist in there. Another control that is very useful to have, and in some rigs you have it, is the cupping control, which you usually find where the pinky connects to the wrist, and you can use this to rotate, you see, and change the shape of the palm to a more aesthetic pose. This pinky is a bit problematic, so I will rotate it even more, although that's anatomically incorrect. So another thing that happens in a twist is that the thumb tends to rest on the second phalanx of the ring and middle finger. So I want to grab the thumb, and with the main first controller I'm going to rotate the controller so that the thumb is generally speaking oriented the way I need it, and then with the second and third controller I'm going to operate on a single axis. Remember that the thumb, second and third phalanx operate on a single axis. It's only the first phalanx that operates on a number of axes. So I'm going to grab these guys and rotate them on a single axis, and you see now we have our fist pose. Not too bad. Now let's save this file and let's talk about mirroring. If you're following this tutorial with Rocket Girl rig, I highly suggest you install Red 9 Studio Pack, which is free of charge, and you can find the link in the description of the video, of course. And if you want to know how to install it because you don't know how to do so, you can find my YouTube tutorial that explains you how to do so. It's very easy and it's very quick. If you're using a different rig instead, if you want to use Red 9 for mirroring poses, my suggestion is to head over to my tutorial in which I explain how to set up a rig to mirror poses. But I also suggest you try Studio Library, which is an excellent tool for mirroring poses. Unfortunately, it doesn't work very well with Rocket Girl rig, but it works well with most of the rigs around, and it's actually a bit faster in terms of setup if compared to Red Studio 9. Again, you will find all the links in the material of this tutorial. Once you have installed Red 9 Studio, you will find an icon with a rocket somewhere in your shelves. You just click on it. It seems like nothing has happened, but if you look at the top right corner of the menu, right to the left of the help menu, you will find the Red 9 menu. You want to click on it and scroll down until you find a tool named Mirror Setup. I will click on it and this window opens up. So this is how we inform the rig about the way we want it to be mirrored. I already did the job for you so that you don't have to do it manually for Rocket Girl, but if you're using a different rig, you will have to go through the process. The process doesn't take long, maybe about 10 minutes, but it's very rewarding once it works. Alternatively, you can use Studio Library, which does it with one click, but doesn't work with all the rigs, but works with most of them. Among the assets I provided with this tutorial, you will find a file named Rocket Girl Red 9 mirror table.mirror map. This file is the file we need to inform Red 9 on how to mirror our poses. Let's copy this file into the folder of our project. I'm going to store it into the data folder. The position doesn't really matter, but I like to store it into the data folder. It's down to your preferences, really. Once you have it back in Maya, first of all, we want to make sure that the phalanx controllers of the right hand are visible in the scene. So I will select all the controllers for the fingers and enable finger tweaks on them. And then we want to left mouse select all of the controls of our rig. If you want to be extra sure, you hold down Control and Shift and you see that the cursor becomes a cursor with a plus. That's additive selection. And we drag another selection just for double safety. And once we have that selection, we are going to go into the mirror setup window, click on Load Mirror Configs, and in there we are going to browse to the data folder where we have our mirror map file. There you have it. Double click on it. Red Studio 9 will think about it. You see it's loading the data. Once the data is loaded, we should be able to mirror poses. Let's see if this works for the fingers. I will select all the fingers controls. I don't need to select anything else apart from the fingers, so I don't need the wrist, for instance. And then I will go to the side, which doesn't have the pose yet. I will select the controls in there. You do not need to be very precise in the selection. The important thing is select at least the controls you need. And then we want to make the pose symmetrical. To do so, we go on the Red 9 Animation Toolkit, and in there you will find at the bottom there's Mirror Controls, Symmetry Pose, left to right. Let's click on it. And there you have it. Now you have the pose mirrored on the opposite side. Not bad. For free, just one click. Not bad. Now let's have a look at the feet. If I grab the right foot in there, my rule of thumb for animating locomotion is that if a foot is on a contact, even partial, I want to keep the foot controller flat on the floor, at least at the beginning, and use the foot roll attribute instead. That makes it super easy, you see, to animate the foot rolling down, so I'm just going to do it that way. And maybe if I feel fancy, I will use the toe wiggle control to flip the tip up a little bit. You see that as I use the foot roll, the leg bends, which means I can maybe lift the root a little bit more, you see, and still get a nice extended pose in there. Not too bad, that's looking quite alright. Now I want to store the pose by selecting all controllers, and on frame 1, hit S like star on your keyboard. That jots down a keyframe. You see there's a vertical red line in there. So now we want to find the opposite contact. And you see that the opposite contact pose is pretty much the opposite of the first contact pose. There is a variation in this area of the screen for the arms, and we will look into it. That depends on the context of the shot, of course. We won't be able to do many variations in this tutorial, really. Back into Maya then, I need to mirror that pose. So first of all, let's find that pose. So I will scrap the timeline. I don't need a timeline this long anymore. I think the run will use the maximum of about 20 frames, 22 frames, but nothing more than that. So in here, you see that the character moves outside the screen, so I was a bit too ambitious when moving the image plane around, so I'm going to go and grab the offset and maybe scale back the character and move it back a little bit. So again, let's select all controllers and let's find the frame. On frame 8, we have our contact pose in there. It's the opposite contact pose. In terms of 3D animation, this will be a mirrored version of the previous contact pose. So I imagine that by opening up Red 9 Animation Toolkit and scroll down until I find Mirror Pose, I imagine that I should be able to mirror this pose, which it seems like I am able to do. Nice and free of charge, not bad. You will now notice that the character we're using as a reference doesn't have exactly the same poses on one contact and on the other. That's because, of course, of the variations that the animator introduced in the shot. Right now we are focused on producing a locomotion loop, so we will just try to find a compromise. One thing I really like about this pose is how close to the body the elbows are. It looks very defensive, very feminine in a way, in a stereotypical way, I would say, almost. So I want to go closer to the Rocket Girl rig and just move the elbow a bit closer. You see this curve between the forearm and the wrist. I want to create the same by grabbing the wrist and moving it out. And especially from the top view at the back, you see that as I keep the wrist this way, curved in, it looks a bit more masculine and heroic. But if as I rotate the wrist out, it starts to look a lot more stereotypically feminine, if you see what I mean. And that looks a lot more feminine in itself. It's a lot more defensive as a position. Similarly, with the back, I want to do a similar pose, maybe bend the elbow a little bit and then twist the shoulder until you see the elbow feels a lot more in. If you think of it, we're not actually even moving the elbow in, but the fact that we are twisting the shoulder this way makes the elbow feel a lot more inwards. And this way you see we have our pose, and if we grab the wrist, we can lift it up. You see that starts to become a lot more feminine than it used to be just a few moments ago. That's kind of neat. And maybe we can twist the wrist a little bit just to show a bit more of the under palm. And there you go. In here you see that now automatically we have a much more feminine pose. Another thing that tends to happen in runs, if you think of it, is that the feet tend to land much closer to the center line than in a walk, in my opinion. You see how the foot goes inwards towards the center line. Also the knees of a female run, they tend to be very close to one another. So back in Maya I want to maybe center the contact foot a little bit better and do the same for the foot which is up in the air. Maybe lower the tip a little bit this way. Maybe I can even move the pole vectors of the knees a little bit closer to one another. That's nicer. And lower the root just enough for the leg to settle in a non-IK pop pose. This pose becomes a lot more feminine as a pose. Again, let's save and set a key on everything. I really suggest that you keep auto key on in Maya while we work on this tutorial. This logo next to the man running away from the gear, if it's red, it means auto key is on. If it's gray, it means it's off. If you set it to on, Maya will automatically record the variations of value. The most attentive will have realized that by changing this contact, we need to go back to frame 1 and copy the contact we have on frame 8 over this and mirror it. So as a rule of thumb, as we do a locomotion loop, we want the things to loop perfectly and then we add variations if need be. So we want to have frame 1 just the same of frame 8. To do so, you select all controllers, you go to frame 8, with the middle mouse button you drag 8 to 1, then you release and you press S like star on your keyboard. That duplicates the key. You see exactly the same key. Then once on frame 1, with all the controllers selected, you hit mirror pose and the pose will be mirrored just like that. Nice. So now we have made the 2 contact poses. Not bad, and it was rather quick. Let's have a look at the face. You see that the face of our character in the reference is a bit sad, so we want to make a concerned run ourselves. So I will just grab the center control of the eyebrows, you see, and just lift it up ever so slightly and rotate it up ever so slightly. And maybe I can have the line a little bit straighter and a bit asymmetric. And then we are going to close the eyelids a little bit, both the top and the bottom one. And then with the mouth, we're going to open the mouth ever so slightly by grabbing the jaw. And then we are going to lower the corners of the mouth ever so slightly. There you go, to give us a sad expression of sorts. So this all alone is enough to make the expression a lot more enticing if you think of it. Now if I undo and go back to the default pose, and you undo by pressing Z, you see how default the default pose was. While if we add a little bit of emotion, Shift Z to redo, remember, then everything looks a lot more interesting in my opinion. These controllers we do not need to mirror if you think of it. We just need to set a key on 1, middle mouse drag 1 over to 8, release and press S like start to duplicate the keys. In order to jump between keys, comma and period on your keyboard will jump between keys. Do not worry about these eyes being left behind. First of all, just make sure that the playback cache is set to off, just in case it was set to on. And then you go under Settings, Preferences, and in there, under Animation, you can set the evaluation mode to either DG or parallel to see if that works any better. And it seems to me that now this is working. It won't affect your animation, although it will affect what you see in there, so it's better to have it work to begin with. So now we have made our 2 contact poses. That was quick. At this stage, we could just go in between the 2 extremes and design all the poses which are missing. But in my opinion, we should stop for a second and devise a strategy to do so. If you think of it, we could right-click on the timeline and enable the stat preview from the menu. We could also go into Windows, Settings, Preferences, and into the animation box, go find the animation tangents that we have by default and set them so that by default when we set a key we create stepped tangents. Because of course the common knowledge is that pros use stepped tangents to perform their blocking. Or do they? Now for instance, let's say that we want to do the kickoff pose, so the pose that right now falls on frame 4. If I have to do this pose from scratch and start moving every single control and counter-rotate the whole body around to create the new pose, well, it's going to take me a while before I get to a pose that works. And even if I succeeded in a short amount of time, I would have no guarantee that the pose I am building does work in the context of the other 2 poses I have built, if you see what I mean. If I am very experienced as an animator, the chances of getting this pose to work correctly would be higher, of course. But not everybody is an experienced animator. I could also employ a tween machine tool to give me some pose that is half the way through the 2 extreme poses, and that's what professionals do as well. However, I found out in my experience that if I kept the tangents to say spline, linear or auto depending on the situation, now as I go to frame 4, you see that part of this pose is already built for me by the software, and you can't really beat the speed of that. Once I have that pose partly built for me, it will be time to actually go in there and build on top of what the software gives me. And things become a bit faster if I use the sync graph editor and sync timeline display, so that maybe I'm happy with the Z translation I get from this foot from the interpolation, for instance, but I maybe don't want to have the same position on X and Y that I get from the interpolation. I can maybe just duplicate that position in X and Y, and similarly I could do the same for rotation. And this way, you see, making the pose becomes a lot easier because the pose sort of works by default. I don't mean to say this pose is finished, I still have to do a lot of work on it, but it kind of works. It's a similar principle to the one you have, for instance, when you use the tween machine on just individual axes and not on all the axes together. Now this way you get the best of both worlds, in my opinion. You get the interpolation that the software gives you for free, paired up with the ability to control your own pose with a certain amount of granularity. Of course, the risk is that if you don't pay attention, you will just be happy with whichever pose the software gives you, so you have to keep your eyes open. But you will still need to keep your eyes open in stepped, and in my opinion, if you are inexperienced, building a breakdown pose from scratch in stepped is way more difficult than building it starting from the interpolation. So I am going to keep my default tangents in Maya to auto, and then I will only use stepped to evaluate the blocking as I work. So this way I will get the nice preview in step that will allow me to troubleshoot the poses, while at the same time I will get the benefits of using an interpolation, of devising a pose starting from something that was already interpolated. You should not take this workflow as a religion. This is just a personal workflow, and you should work with any workflow you think it's most efficient. So if you find a better way to proceed than this one, just feel free and go for the better way. Don't use my way. So if I scrap the timeline, I can have a look at the image plane. Now the problem with this image plane is that the camera moves a lot, so maybe we can do something about it. Very often animators, they do counter track their footage so that the character stays stable in the viewport. You can do that in post-production with Premiere or After Effects, so you can also do it here. So I can maybe go into the camera, view, image plane attributes, select the image plane that I'm working on, And then into the channel box, you see that I have the offset Y and X. I can maybe set a key on one on both, and then maybe I can go to frame 5, set another key on both, and maybe I only need to move the image plane a little bit. And you're essentially trunking the body of the girl, so you want the body to stay still in your viewport. There you go, so that you can better evaluate the changes in the pose. I will maybe move the keyframe to 4 because that's when the key changes in the reference. You can actually go in there, and every time there is a change in the reference, because it's animated on 2, you could move your image plane so that the body stays centered in the viewport. It doesn't move that much. If you need the reference point, you can maybe put the rocket girl nearby so that you can tell if the character moves around a bit too much. Remember, I'm tracking the body of the reference. If you want to be a bit gentler and more precise as you slide around the image plane, you hold down Control in your viewport, you select the offset X-axis of the image plane in the channel box, you hold down Control in your viewport, and you middle mouse drag. That gives you a bit more precision. The movement will be smaller. There you go. It's just a few frames, so I can do that by hand. Then I go to frame 6. I'm using comma and period on my keyboard to just jump between keyframes, and then I have frame 8. So now the character in the reference video is staying still in the relative space of the viewport. Nice. You can even go on to frame 10 and adjust frame 10 as well. You see that, for instance, between 8 and 10, you can see how the body lowers and the head remains stable there, or rather moves up if compared to the body in this view. So by tracking the reference footage, you can actually understand better what are the changes in the internal economy of the body of a character, which provides you with great insights as you animate. So now that I have those keys, I can just double click on the timeline for the image plane, right click and go tangents, stepped. Because at the end of the day, the image plane only changes every 2 frames. I do not need to interpolate the motion of the image plane. I just need it to move whenever there is a change in the framing, and that is every 2 frames. So that's sorted. So now hopefully it will be a bit easier to work with the references. I'm going to start with the kickoff pose because the kickoff pose contains the last pose in which the foot which was contacting on frame 1 is in contact with the floor. So for me that's a massive change. I would call it almost an extreme pose. Probably it is an extreme pose. So I'm going to check the references there, and it seems to me that on frame 6 the right foot is already afloat. So probably the kickoff pose, as far as this animator is concerned, would be happening at frame 4. It seems to me that's the pose. So you see that the ankles of Rocket Girl are a bit broken, so maybe with the right IK foot control selected, we can open up the twin machine, move the slider all the way to the left, and that will give us a pose which is exactly the pose we had on the contact. If you think of it, when we swap, it's the same thing. Now maybe I can move the foot back in world axis by holding down W, left mouse button, and pick the world axis coordinate system, and then I move the foot all the way to the back, zero out the foot roll, and I have my kickoff pose. Remember that we will animate the character on the spot, and then we will move the master linearly forward. That means if the master moves linearly forward, it means that the feet must move linearly backward. So I will make sure that this foot translates channels are set to linear for now, so that it won't be sliding as I move the master forward. But we will see more about this later. If you don't get the forward backward linear motion thing, don't worry too much about it. We will stumble into it a bit later. If you're eager to know more, I really suggest you watch my walk cycle tutorial, because in there I explain the thing extensively, in fact. And just as I was anticipating earlier on, you can see that the pose we are having thanks to the interpolations is already quite similar to the one in our reference. It kind of works by default. It's not exactly the same, but I think that if we increase the foot roll and maybe the toe raise a little bit, that would let us raise the root and get an almost straight line with the right leg, which is kicking off. Then maybe we can adjust the rotation of the left foot and the position. And the left foot, you see in the reference, looks like it's a bit more forward, so I'm going to try and put it forward. If you end up in gimbal lock like I am, don't worry too much about it for now. You can hold down E, left mouse button, and go object and rotate it in object mode. This is going to be interesting anyway. Later on we are probably going to have issues with that. As far as the arms are concerned, remember the elbow of the lady, the right elbow, is quite high up, which makes sense if you consider that the left leg is quite high up and the legs and arms are opposing by default in locomotion. Remember that as you bend the elbow, you can only bend it on one axis, at least for now. Then as you become more expert, you will understand when it's possible to cheat and bend it in different axes. Also, if you're doing very stylized animation, very cartoony animation, you can easily break the elbow and it's not a big deal. But for this kind of animation, we really need to keep the elbow straight. And then at a certain point, maybe while splining, we may break it a little bit. Then the hand, I really want to have this kind of broken elbow line like I have in the reference. It's a bit small in the reference, you can barely see it, but you see it's almost vertical. And then finally, I guess I want to move the elbow a bit closer in. There you go. For the left arm, I can move the arm to the back, twist it open a little bit, and maybe raise the wrist a little bit and make sure it's not broken in 3D. So always make sure that there is some sort of connection between the forearm and the wrist. Otherwise, the wrist will look very broken. It may not look broken from a position like this one. You may even think this kind of makes sense, but when you move to another point of view, you will find a difference. And if you're working for a video game, you can't necessarily predict the angle at which the character will be seen. So you really need to be careful with anatomy, at least at the beginning. Then, as you get to know your project a little bit better, you will know when you can cheat and when you can't really cheat. So I guess the elbow in the reference is not that bent forward, so we'll just keep a little bit of a bend in there. There you go, and that should be it, I guess. As far as the hips are concerned, I can tell that the left hip is moving forward to support the motion forward of the left leg and to support the motion backward of the right one. So in fact, I can move the right one. You see, the moment I start taking care of the hip, the legs can be adjusted again. So don't spend too much time on the feet at the beginning. Just put them in the right position and then adjust the body, because you might have to end up adjusting them again once you adjust the body. So I'm going to counter twist, maybe with the upper controls of the spine. So the right arm will push the chest forward, or the other way around rather. And maybe I could push the arm forward a little bit more and the left one backward a little bit more using the clavicles. And that's going to be my pose. It's a good idea to have a look at the pose from any possible angle to make sure that it kind of works. Sometimes I don't really like the viewport lens, so I select the camera and I go into the focal length in the attribute editor. By the way, to select the camera, I was a bit quick on that. It's the top left button on the viewport, this guy with the camera icon. And then here in the channel box on the right hand side, you can just increase the focal length so you will get less deformation. The problem I had earlier on is that the camera was something like this. So when you get close to a character, it looks very deformed. If you look at a character with a 60 or a 50, it looks a lot less deformed, and you can go around the character and see things a little bit clearer, in my opinion anyway. I kind of don't like to see the rocket right now, so maybe I can go into the rig itself, find the geometry group in the outliner, and see there's a rocket pack geo which I can press H on and hide for the time being. You'll know it's hidden because it's grayed out in the outliner. If you select it again and press H, it will come back, so don't worry too much. You're not deleting the thing. Maybe I can imagine that as I lift the left foot, maybe the hip is also lifting on the left hand side, and as I do it, you see that the right leg becomes bent a little bit, which might give us a little bit more leeway to move forward or upward with the body. And that's more or less my pose in there. Let's have a look at the previous pose. I think this could work. I kind of feel like between 1 and 4 in the reference, the character is leaning backward a little bit, but we have to look at it in the context as well. The animation goes forward and the character is going into a turn in here, so they will lean backward to prevent the body from falling forward. So I'm not going to act on it too much. Maybe I could just grab all the spine controllers except the pelvis and rotate them backward ever so slightly. And the beauty of it is that if you think of it, we only touched some controls, not all of them. However, it is a good idea at this stage, once you have the pose, to just grab all of the controls and set a key on your pose so that whichever thing happens, you won't be changing your posing by mistake. Let's imagine for a second that I haven't set a key on some controllers and then I enable the step preview. You see that the pose is changing. Well, there are two reasons in this case for which the pose is changing. One is that this character is not fully compatible with the step preview. The other thing is that any control which does not have a key on this particular frame is going to be showing the previous key. So let's have a look at the pole vectors, for instance, to explain this phenomenon a bit better. So let's have a look at translate Z of this pole vector control. You see it's here. This is the one. I move it and it moves forward and backward. Please stay with me. Right now the step preview is off, so this is just interpolated. You see, it just moves slowly back and forward. That's fine. Now, when you enable the step preview, Maya is just covertly converting your animation to stepped. It doesn't really change the curves, but that's what it's trying to do anyway. So let's disable step preview for a second. What happens when I'm on frame 4, grab my curve and convert it to step? You see, it does change position because in stepped, the control stays there, see, stays, until it goes to the next key. So if you have not set a key on that pose on frame 4, when you check the animation step preview, you get false feedback. You don't get really your pose, you get half the way between your pose and the stepped preview. So you don't want that to happen to your animation, which is why I suggest that after you figure out a pose, you select all controls on that pose and you set a key for all controls on that pose, at least while you learn. Then as you become a bit more expert, you decide what's the best workflow for you. I probably should offset the image plane by 1 frame less, if you think of it, because on frame 0 you see that we have the same pose that we have on frame 1, and then frame 1 stays there, animated on 2, so that makes sense. Then we have the next pose that stays for 2 frames in the reference image plane, and then so forth and so forth. So in fact, the image plane has been offset by 1 frame too many. So I'm going to go into the image plane attributes and I'm going to change the frame offset to 250. That means that now the image plane is translating at the wrong offset, right? So we click on selecting the attribute editor for the image plane, go into the channel box, and these 2 channels are those that we have to move by 1 frame to the right. There you go. And now it should be stabilized. That means that our poses also need to be moved 1 frame to the right, apart from the first one. There you go. So now we are again lined up. I don't know how I didn't notice this mistake earlier on. And if you look really closely, you see how we have a space for 1 drawing at frame 3 and a space for a drawing at frame 7, which is exactly what the 2D animator was doing. So I think we are onto something in here. So now remember, we are not in step preview. We want to maybe decide what's the next pose we want to work on. And at this stage, I don't think it makes much of a difference really. I will work on frame 7, which is the high pose, the up pose. We are up in the air. Please notice that this animator is following our same workflow, by the way. Or rather, we are following his because he's probably older than I am and he's been around for longer. So I'm going to select the left IK foot. With the twin machine, I'm going to move the slider all the way to the right so that I get a contact pose in there, but I'm going to raise it a little bit. And I guess I will set a key on the root as well, just to see what happens. It's going to be very difficult for us to evaluate whether the character in the reference image is going up or down. We can sort of assume that if this is the top position, the root will also lift up a little bit if compared to the pose at 5. So there will be a bit of up motion in there. And remember, we don't want to stretch the legs. That's not needed for this animation. And please notice how the biggest motion that you see on screen in the reference picture is the one between the left foot previous position and the left foot next position, followed maybe by the right arm. You see that the right hand is moving quite a lot. And please notice that in our animation, just thanks to the interpolation, this is happening just for free. Not bad. That means that we're using the computer to do what the computers are good at. We are not doing the job of a computer, which is great. So now this foot, poor guy, is rotating all over the place. One thing you can do to see if this is something coming from a gimbal lock is to open the graph editor, grab all the curves, and go under Curves, Euler Filter. And Maya will try to recompute the curves, and you see that it gives you a much better pose. So in fact, we were onto something here. The problem being that sometimes the controls are in gimbal lock with 2 axes on top of one another, and that really makes it difficult to animate. So every now and then you have to run an Euler filter, and even with that you might have to do some tricks to clean that animation at a later stage. and the most advanced rigs are able to somehow bypass this issue anyway. I want to check the difference between the two poses. I will set a key on the right foot anyway. And you see that the right foot is lifting off the floor, but really not doing much, essentially translating to the back a little bit and lifting up. I guess I could just zero out the foot roll in there, rotate the foot a little bit more to the back, translate it forward. There you go. You see, it's not doing much. The biggest relative motion comes from the left foot moving forward, in fact, and the right hand a little bit. So let's have a look at the right hand as well. The right hand, you see, it's moving quite closer to the center of the body. It could also be an effect due to the camera point of view, and we have to keep in mind that the animator there is adjusting their animations based to the camera angle. We don't have that luxury. We have to make it work from all points of view, right? And you see that the main difference of the right arm between the contact pose and the kickoff pose was that the elbow was bending quite a lot. And in our poses, you see that's also the same difference. And then between the kickoff pose and the up pose, you see that the main motion is not really a change of angle between the elbow and the arm, but is rather a change of position of the wrist. And we are replicating that. Let's have a look at the left arm. So the left arm is naturally working, I would say. That's kind of cool, in fact. I think I will have to adjust the pose of the left arm for the opposite contact, but I would say that this is kind of working already. That's quite cool. Now let's have a look at the hip motion. I would imagine that if we wanted to contact with the left foot, we would rotate the hip down on the left foot just to favor that pose, and forward on the left foot just to favor that pose. That would let us extend the foot quite a lot more if you think of it. There you go. That looks about fine. Now let's have a look and see if we can understand what the chest is doing between 5 and 7. And the chest is quite stable, I would say, and so is the hip really in the motion. So I animated my hip, but maybe I didn't really need to. So for now I will just let the chest go. I won't really do anything in there. Let's have a look at the head and the neck. Set a key on 7, and using comma and period again, I have the feeling that there is a certain delay in the head. It feels almost like it stays a bit more behind. So I'm going to just rotate the neck behind a little bit and the head forward a little bit, just to create a little bit of a delay in there. Maybe I could again roll the spine back a little bit just to create a little bit of delay in the upper part and favor the contact on the way down. There you go. I don't know what happened to my facial expression there. I worked so hard to get it. Maybe I want to save just before something odd happens. So I'm going to call this thing version 2. And this will be poses. That's where I store my poses. And I think I'm looking at the viewport issue. You see that if I move one control, the eyes, they pop in place. So we are experiencing a viewport issue. I really recommend that as you work with Rocket Girl, which is a pretty old rig, you set your viewport to DG. So you go into Windows Settings, Preferences, and in there under Settings, Animation, you make sure you're working with DG. Another way to wake up a rig that fell asleep, so to speak, is to grab the master, move it around, and undo. That usually also works. I have the feeling that the head in my character is traveling forward as I move. Now let's have a look at it from the front view. You see that as we move between the contact and the kickoff, the neck is moving quite a lot, and I tend to think that the neck was in the wrong position in the contact to begin with. Sometimes it's easier to just go back to the previous pose and see the difference, so I can maybe straighten the neck in the contact so that it stays straight in the kickoff as well. That means that if we change, remember, if we change one contact, we have to go to the opposite contact of the control we changed and then mirror the pose there. There you go. And now the neck looks a lot better. So you always have to keep your eyes open. I mean, from the point of view of the perspective, it felt almost as if the neck was translating forward. But when we went and checked the front view, you see how the problem was that really it was moving sideways. Remember, this is called 3D animation for a reason. You really have to check it in 3D. So we have done our up pose. We can select all controls as before, set a key. And now we go and we do what would be called the down pose or passing pose in our workflow. And you see that almost automatically the down pose is made for us. Very similar, not perfect, but very similar. So let's get down to it and see what we can do to improve it. So first of all, let's set a key on the foot so that we have it there. And we maybe roll back to 0 and toe raise back to 0 and toe wiggle to 0 as well. So remember, we are flat on the floor in there. There you go. And maybe that means that in the kickoff, we can set the wiggle to 0 as well. I forgot it on. I'm so clumsy today. So there you go. I am going to reset the toe wiggle all the way through. So practically the foot self-animated itself. The one part that won't fix itself usually is the hips. In fact, if you lower your weight a little bit, what happens in real life is that the leg supporting the weight, the right one in this case, is going to stay relatively straight, right? Which means it's going to push up the hip on each side. So that means that you will have the feeling that the hip is going down on the side which doesn't lift any weight. So now you see that as I touch the floor and the leg pushes to support the weight, the hip is pushed up. You don't really want to do too much of this thing because we don't want too much hip motion in a run. Remember, the focus is forward movement and run. We don't want to waste excessive energy in unnecessary hip swinging. So I'm going to check that the hip is pushed up on the right side, and maybe I'm going to reduce the swing on the kickoff pose. There you go. Now let's have a look at the arms. The arms are going to be tricky on this one. See how in the reference, the right arm is bent quite a lot more already. So I think I can grab the elbow and just lift it up a little bit on its correct anatomical axis. Then I can grab the arm itself and just move it forward a little bit. But you see how the elbow is on the inside, so that means that the arm needs to be twisted a little bit this way, and we need to move it forward so that the elbow is leading the motion. You see that one of the most notable differences between frame 1 and 3 is that the elbow was behind on frame 1 and it's leading. So we have an inversion, if you think of it, of the arm rotation. And that inversion needs to start from the shoulder control. I mean, you could go as far as doing something like this, but that would be crazy. So there you go. Now we have that inversion. That's maybe a bit too much. Something like this will work, I guess. Now let's have a look at what happens to the left arm. In the animation we're using as a reference, the elbow on the left arm stays relatively outside, while ours goes a lot to the inside. So I'm going to move this guy relatively outside. Also, the bend in the elbow doesn't seem to be so marked, so I'm going to reduce that bend. And remember, the wrist moves up a little bit, so I'm going to move the wrist up a little bit. There you go. That means that probably the shoulder will go down a little, I guess, on that side. I'm just guessing here. In general, when the hips go up in one direction, the chest goes down in that direction. But we want to have something very little. We don't want it to look too awkward. And maybe we can do it with both controls for the spine, a little bit this way. There you go. You could even go and overlay your character on top of the girl character you're using as a reference and enable the X-ray geometry just to see whether you're getting the main changes right. I mean, we are not really tracing stuff in here, but I think it's a good idea, especially as you learn from the best animators and just see what's the timing, because it's not trivial. I remember the first time I had to animate a character breathing, I thought, well, how hard can it be, right? I mean, it just needs to breathe in and exhales, right? The problem was that I didn't know the first thing about breathing, exhaling, inhaling. I didn't know anything about that really. I didn't even know how long it took. But when I had that first shot that I had to animate, I realized how little I knew about breathing. So I think it's a good idea to just have a look at your references and see how your animation lines up to the references, if it does, and whether there is something that you could improve on. And if you think of it, we are quite spot on in there, except there is one thing that I don't quite like in my animation, and that is between the up pose and the contact pose. You see that in here the leg goes down quite a lot. That's the main motion, right? Everything goes down, while our character feels a bit stiff. It doesn't quite feel like the leg is going down. So I think we need to do something about that, and that something could be to grab both the feet and the root control and just move everything up a little bit. And then for the foot which is leading, the left one, I'm going to lift the foot a little bit more, move it forward a little bit more, so that the motion on the way down, you see, will be a bit more pronounced. So sometimes you need a stronger movement towards one direction, but you can't change the landing pose because that's set, right? I mean, you can't go under the ground, can you? That means that if you want to see the transition to that pose from the previous one, you change the previous one so that the transition becomes better, so that you can create more contrast. Then I can also, I guess, relax the hip a little bit. In terms of the animation of the right arm, I can maybe lower it a little bit and then grab the elbow and raise it even more so that the elbow stays there. You see, in practice, the wrist of the character in the reference is moving down as well. So maybe I could move the elbow again, move it down ever so slightly so that the wrist moves down as well, and maybe just lift the wrist up a little bit more in there. There you go. The left arm in this contact is doing quite some rotation on the wrist if you think of it, so maybe I could introduce a little bit more of that rotation and lift up the elbow a little bit. Remember, on its correct anatomical axis only. There you go. So that gives me a similar motion. Now, of course, I changed the contact pose, remember, and whenever you change the contact pose, you have to select all the controls involved. I will select them all and then mirror the pose on the opposite side. Now, if you use a tool like Animbot, there is a way for you to tell the software to automatically mirror the poses of a loop. But as I said earlier on, this is a paid-for plugin, so I can't assume that everybody watching this tutorial will have it. So I'm going to do this with the basic tools that I find around for free. So let's duplicate that pose and mirror it. So middle mouse drag 9 over to 1, hit S to set a key. Now 1 and 9 should be exactly the same pose, and on frame 1 I'm going to go into red 9 animation and mirror the pose. There you go. Now I'm going to check the animation there. If you enable the step preview in here, you will notice something funky. That something funky is that the rotation of the foot changes. This is due to the way the rig computes. I could not find a solution to this problem. This seems to be an incompatibility issue between Maya step preview and this rig in particular, but we are not so concerned about it. So with all the controllers selected, we are going to set a key on every single pose so that we don't accidentally change these poses. And now it's time for us to mirror the poses. So I'm going to shift left mouse drag over the timeline to select my keys, right click and copy, and then go over the next keyframe I will have to insert, which is 2 frames after the last one on frame 11, and right click and paste. That's going to paste the pose that we have earlier on. That means we have to mirror them, but that's easy. We mirror the pose, mirror the pose, mirror the pose, and that's done. And at the end, if you want this to loop, we go to frame 1, duplicate it over to 17, and the animation will loop just fine. Now, if we want to check this animation in step without the step preview, because remember the step preview is going to change the position and the look of my feet, see that? We are going to need to select all keys by double clicking with the left mouse button on the timeline, right click on it, and then we're going to go tangents and stepped. At the end of the day, if you think of it, the only tangents we really used was some linears on the feet, so we can restore them, don't worry too much about that. If we now play back between 16 and 1, we don't want to play 17 because that would be repeating one keyframe, right? So as I press play, there you go, we have our worried run. Not too bad indeed. And it didn't take long at all if you think of it. Starting from here, we have 2 routes. One is to go and keep the animation on 2s. So just the way it was animated originally, we keep a pose for 2 frames. That's going to look probably better than refining this animation, I think. The other one is to refine it. So I will first have a pass at fixing the poses a little bit and see if there's anything that I have to fix in there. Then I will show you how to keep it on 2s like the original animation. And after we are happy with that result, we're going to see how this could be converted into smooth 3D animation. So every single frame is different. And you're going to see that the moment we move to the traditional CG look, it's not going to look as cool as it looked when it was on 2s. I think there's some magic in the animation that happens on 2s, and it is probably due to the fact that the frames get impressed in your brain a bit longer, so they make for stronger posing and emotion. We have been rather quick as we should have been to begin with. This way we can already evaluate which parts of the animation need love and which parts are already working. At this stage, you are primarily looking for sudden accelerations or arcs that break, for instance. So if I have a look at the right arm is quite nice and smooth, and the legs also, they look quite okay. I wish I had a little bit more delay between the head and the body. It seems a bit like the head is going down 1-to-1 with the body. If you think of it, you can tell that body and head fall down pretty much the same way as we approach the contact. It almost feels like the head is anticipating the body, which is a bit too much probably, so that's something that is worth looking at. And then after we hit the contact pose, you see that there is almost no down. So maybe we can increase the down a little bit. As we progress, it's a good idea to write down this stuff. This is a pretty quick character, but sometimes in visual effects, you might end up working with a rig that works very slowly. And by the time you do a little bit of a fix, you don't even remember what you were doing because it took so long. So let's write it down. So the head delay when body goes down. And it's a good idea to include when. So I think between 8 and 9, which is between 7 and 9 if you think of it, because those are the two poses. So you have to be very specific as you write down the notes so that you will go into the scene and you will fix specifically the problematic areas. Everything else was already working, so you don't need to stay there and clean it up too much. For now, your main interest is to show something to the client or the supervisor or whoever or yourself quickly so that they get whether you're going in the right direction or not. So that's something to fix, we were saying. And then between 9, the contact, and the down, there is almost no down motion. So between 1 and 3, I guess, 1 and 3, increase down motion, I would say. Not so much so, but just enough. Then what else? The arc of the left arm needs some love, I think, particularly between 8 and 11. I'm not sure what happens there. So check left arm arc between 8 and 11. Everything else seems about fine. So we can close this playblast and we have our list of things to do. So head delay, increase down motion, check left arm arc. So let's do it. The down motion should be relatively straightforward. If we go to frame 3, we can just lower the body a little bit and you see that that's enough to give us down motion. Remember, we will have to mirror the poses. Unless we have Animbot that mirror the poses for us, of course that is. So there you go, we lower it a little bit, just ever so slightly. And then one thing that we can do maybe is we cheat a little bit with the head, and as the head goes up, we delay the head a little bit, we keep it low. And then at 7, we delay the way up, and at 9, as we go down, you see that as we go down, the head almost goes down together with the body. So maybe we can just delay the neck, you see, just keep it higher up, and maybe even cheat a little bit with the translation. As you're learning, it's not a good idea to cheat with the translation of a head unless you know what you're doing. It's very easy to break it, and even for me, really. There you go. So now the head is delayed on the way up, and then on the way down, it's delayed ever so slightly. Please notice that I'm also rotating the nose a little bit higher up so that you have a little bit of upward rotation and the head doesn't feel too stiff. As the character falls down, the nose stays behind a little bit. Okay, that's quite a nice thing to have, I think. Then I think that's looking quite okay now. I'm a bit unsure about 1 to 3 and 3 to 5 for the chest. So the chest is moving slightly backward there and then stops moving backward and goes forward. So maybe I will keep the chest a little bit more forward on 3. 7 and 9, you see that the chest rolls up. You can tell it by the head as well. But then between 7 and 9, the chest is almost blocked, glued. So maybe I can delay the movement up for the chest on 7 so that I will exaggerate it so that you will see. So I delay it quite a lot so that you see that now as we go towards 9, the chest moves up and it doesn't feel quite as stiff. But I think I've exaggerated it. So there you go, something like this. And maybe on 9, I can just rotate the chest a little bit, just not to stop the motion. Maybe I can delay this a little bit as well. You could even cheat and just translate it up a little bit. You see now I'm compressing after the down. Remember that if we change 9 as we did, we're going to need to mirror 1 again. So then what else did we need to do in there? So we delayed the head, increased the down motion, and check the left arm arc between 8 and 11. I guess I meant 9 and 11 there. Ooh, 9, 11. So let's see what happens between 9 and 11. So the arm stays still so the left arm stays pretty still between 7 and 9. But then between 9 and 11, it kind of pushes forward with a lot of speed. So maybe that's a bit too much. So that means I have to go, if the action happens between 9 and 11, I have to go between 1 and 3 because it makes sense to fix one half of the cycle and then just duplicate and mirror it. So I will go between 1 and 3 and just delay ever so slightly the movement, but not so much so, just ever so slightly. There you go, just to remove a little bit of the sudden acceleration. I'm not sure I did a good job in there, but it could potentially work. I'm a bit worried about the rotation of the wrist forward in front of the chest. There's a lot of motion forward in here, but very little to the center, and then there's a lot to the center, then a little bit less, and then almost nothing. So maybe I can start rotating a little bit earlier. The pose at 7, I'll rotate a little bit less, so that between 7 and 8 and 9 there is a little bit of continuous motion, continuous rotation towards the center of the chest. At this stage, you might have different problems than I do. So you just have to evaluate arcs, the basic principles of animations in practice, arcs, whether there is overlapping motion with the head and the chest and so forth. But if you did the basic poses, your run will look okay already. Now, remember, now I need to mirror the poses. I changed pose 9, so that means I have to set a key on everything, go to frame 1, drag pose 9 over to frame 1 with the middle mouse button, hit S, and then make sure that 1 is mirrored. There you go. And then I changed all the poses between 3 and 7, so I can just copy them. It's a good idea to delete the old poses. Sometimes when you paste pose over pose, you get a mix of the two poses depending on the situation, so you really want to be careful. So I will just grab these poses between 3 and 7, paste them on 11, and then go at 11, mirror, 13, mirror, 15, mirror. And then I will copy frame 1 over to 17 and make sure all the tangents are set to step, and we are back to checking the arcs. Still not convinced about the left arm. In fact, I am less convinced than I was earlier on, but the head is a lot cooler, it's a lot gentler if you think of it. So that's quite cool, it's not too bad. And I really need to play between 1 and 16 really. There you go. That looks a bit more rushed as a run. So let's have one last look at the wrist arc. One thing that may be strange is the arc of the elbow there. The elbow moves a lot. It moves forward quite a lot, then to the center, then to the center again, and then stays there between 7 and 9, and then comes back. I guess the problem might be that between 5 and 7 the elbow is moving to the center, and then between 7 and 9 it's already inverting the direction. So maybe I can use world coordinate system and just rotate the elbow a little bit more to the back, so it won't invert the root just between 7 and 9. I think that might work. And I want to check this arc from this angle as well, from a 3/4. You see that there's something weird going on. The elbow moves forward quite a lot, then a little bit, and then it locks there. So maybe I can lift it up so that it keeps moving forward a little bit, doesn't lock. There you go. And then there's something else, which is, I think, the rotation of the wrist. The wrist comes in, and then between 5 and 7 it's essentially locked. You see, it doesn't change rotation or nothing, and between 7 and 9 it moves again. So I think that may be the culprit there. So I'm going to select all controls, set all tangents to auto again, and I want to see what happens if I grab the wrist and the elbow, and at 7 just delete the key and see what happens to the interpolation. And I think from the side view the interpolation is quite cool. Let's see it from the 3/4. I think from the 3/4 is quite kind of okay as well. I'm going to maybe keep the wrist a little bit more in line. Yeah, I think it works. So now let's grab them all again, and remember I changed 3 to 7, so I'm going to again copy them. This is when Animbot really comes in handy in my opinion, because it's a tool that would do this process of mirroring and duplicating for us, which makes animation a lot faster, of course. I duplicated my poses, mirror, mirror, and mirror. Now I'm going to check and make sure that loop starts and stops with the same exact pose, set everything to stepped one last time, and play back the animation in step. Remember, I convert the animation to step just because the rig does not support step preview. I would otherwise have used the step preview there. So there you go. Now the animation looks nice. Everything seems to be tracked thoroughly. Let's make a playblast. Please notice how whenever I make a playblast, I make sure there's a frame counter on screen so that I know which frames are in need of attention. And one thing you have to check when you use a software like, for instance, DJV, is that DJV view tends to play back the animation at the last used animation frame rate, which was 30 frames, because just before recording this tutorial I was animating on a game, so I was running it at 30 frames per second. So I'm really animating at 24 in here, because I thought it looks a bit too quick. And this will be the animation on 2s, as if it was hand-drawn, so to speak. One of the problems these animations often have is the front view. So you want to make sure that from the front view, the neck and head are not moving too much side to side. Remember that you need to keep a stable head in order to aim at things as you run. So please notice how between 1 and 3 we are going down towards the center, but between 3 and 5 we are going back to where we come from. And between 5 and 7, we are inverting the motion and going again to the left. So that can't be good. So I'm going to use the neck control and a global axis to make sure that if on 3 we go down towards the center like we are, then on 5 we keep moving in the same direction so we don't invert the motion, and on 7 we will be fine. Remember to always duplicate and mirror your poses when you do a change, but it's a good idea to do your change and after you did several changes, duplicate and mirror unless you have an automatic tool to do that. One problem that the head tends to have when it's in global is that people forget that the head, there is a little bit of rotation at the head anyway, so it's not perfectly stable. So one thing I suggest is that you rotate it ever so slightly one way and the other just ever so slightly, just to make sure that it doesn't stay perfectly aligned vertically, otherwise it will look computerized. Now since we edited the head motion, we're going to go and copy the keys, paste the keys, and then we're going to mirror, 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 and then we're going to make sure that the beginning and the end are exactly the same. Now as I press play, there you go, the head is a lot more rational there. There may be still a bit too much up and down there. If you check the image plane, you will find that there is a bit of up and down in there in the head, but the head is, and that's because in general as an audience we tend to track the face of a person. So if the camera is panning, the character is running and there's no falling down and the head moves up and down too much, that's going to be pretty difficult to track the head motion. So in general, we tend to stabilize the head a lot more when running in animation, that I know of anyway. That's my experience anyway. So I'm going to go and grab maybe the chest, and I'm going to cheat with the chest. So as we go to the down pose, I'm going to counter stretch on the way up the head and chest just ever so slightly to reduce the downward motion, and then down on the up. And this should have the effect of having still the hips go up and down while keeping the head a lot more stabilized. And then remember, again, we change the posing, so we're going to copy and paste and just mirror, mirror, mirror. You see that now the head is a lot more stable on the way up and down, but you still have the feeling that the character is going up and down, but the head is a lot more stable. And if you have been careful not to overdo it, you will find out that now you will have the same amount of ups and downs in the body, but the head will have considerably less. It's easy to spot it if you watch it from the side view. So if I go and check the side view, you see that the hip moves up and down quite a lot in there, but the head doesn't really cover that much ground up and down. Not as much as the hip anyway. Quite a handy tool to still keep the feeling or the illusion of an up and down motion with the body, but do not have the head inherit all of that up and down. The risk of this technique, especially at the beginning, is that the character will act like a pigeon and the head will be super stabilized. So it will take a few tests before you get it right. If you don't feel comfortable doing it, just don't do it. Keep the ups and downs for now, and when you will be a little bit more experienced, you can try this. The animation you're looking at in here is in step. You wouldn't believe it, but it is actually in step. Look at that. Every key stays up for 2 frames. And yet when you press play, it works rather beautifully already. And it does so from practically every point of view. One thing you can do in runs is fake a little bit of forward motion. So let's convert everything back to auto tangents. So we'll select all the keys, set them all to auto tangents. And then I will grab the root. And on the kickoff pose, I will push the body and the foot a little bit more forward. That means I will have to probably roll a little bit more with the right foot so that the leg is not entirely straight. It doesn't go into a pop. This is to fake the idea of a push. So if you now check the head, you see that the head moves in the kickoff. If you track the nose, you see that the nose tracks forward. Otherwise, you would have had a little bit of a problem because it would have looked as if it was a bit. And again, for the up pose, you can maybe cheat a little bit and move the same left foot and the root a little bit more forward. And for the contact, you can maybe move the root only a little bit more forward, so that between the up and the contact, we come back a little bit. And between the contact and the down, the body comes back to its natural position. Remember, we changed the contact on 9, so we have to go back to 1 and mirror. In fact, the biggest problems you will have in following this tutorial will be to remember to duplicate and mirror the poses that you have changed. But if you keep the focus, you should be able to pull it off anyway. So now we change the root motion and we change the left foot motion for practically all the frames, I think. So I'm going to copy all keys between 3 and 5, paste them from 11.
and just mirror, mirror, mirror. There you go. Now the face is probably having some weird animation in there. You see that the character changes expression every now and then, so maybe I just need one single pose in there. I think the one I have at frame 9 is good enough for me, so I can just copy it to 1 and duplicate and delete every other key in there. Now I press play, and between 1 and 16, that's the animation. It works pretty neatly. It's pretty smooth as it is if you think of it. So as I promised earlier on, I want to make a playlist with animation on 2s as if it were traditional animation. So I will set it to step again, and I will make a playlist which I will call 2s because that's my animation on 2s. Now as I press play, that's my animation. There you go. And this is the animation as it is on 2s. The result is quite appealing. It's quite cool. Now let's move on and move this girl through space. Let's make this person run through the space instead of running on the spot. To make the character run through space, you need to first understand how fast the feet are moving on the floor and then counter animate the master forward by that same amount. Let's have a look at how this is done. On frame 1, I will grab the contact foot control, I will duplicate it and I will unparent it. Ctrl D to duplicate and Shift P to unparent it. And that's the foot in there. Duplicating an object in Maya by default does not duplicate the keys or even break the rig. This has just become a NURBS curve without any importance whatsoever. Or rather, with some importance, because now I can go to the kickoff pose, which was on frame 5, move the master forward until the controller of the right foot is lining up to the duplicated controller. And if you think of it, this will give me the exact speed at which the foot is moving backward and the exact speed at which the master is moving forward. I do not really need any other key on the master apart from 1 and 5 if you think of it, so all these keys that are left over will be deleted. Now you can't really keep the master in step if you think of it, you will have to convert it to linear. Now the character will move forward, you see, but you see that the feet are sort of sliding because they're still in steps. So we have seen an efficient workflow to get the blocking through the door. We have seen the look at the animation on 2s, which you could have rendered and it would have looked more or less like traditional animation in terms of timing. And now we want to push this forward into the realm of 3D splined animation. So we need everything to go back to auto tangents to begin with. There you go. And except for the feet when they are on the floor. Please notice that right now the feet aren't sliding already. This is a great success. They don't slide. If they are sliding, you might have forgotten to set them to linear as they travel back in time. You see these guys? They're set to linear. Not bad, I would say. That ensures that there is no sliding. So in that case, you just need to set them on linear and make sure that on each one of these 3 poses, the foot is where it should be without sliding. The important thing is to have 2 keys only on your master. And if you want your master to move forward forever and ever, which you probably want to, you want to go into the graph editor, view infinity to show the infinite line there. And then you go under curves, post infinity, cycle with offset. And now the character will go forward forever and ever and ever and ever and ever without ever sliding. Not bad. That was cheap. It was easy to do. Now I no longer need this guy, but I might need it later on for the splining, so I will keep it there. I will just hide it for now, otherwise I will get confused. Let's save the file as version 3 linear master. So that's where the master was set to linear. And I think we can now transition into splining. So we'll go file, save as again, because I want to store a file without any edit, and set the version to 4 and the comment to splining. There you go. This way, even if I break something in here, I can always go back to the blocking version 3 in which everything was working just fine. It's a good time to start splining. However, before giving into the temptation of splining feet and legs and arms and whatever, we really should focus on splining the body instead. So I will hide the parts of the body that I don't need right now, and to do so I just need to go into the main group of Rocket Girl group. If you open it up, you will find the controller. If you find the transform controller and you open it up, you will find the geometry group. And if you go into the attribute editor by pressing Ctrl A on your keyboard, you can scroll down until you find the drawing overrides, these guys. Now the drawing overrides are by default enabled in Rocket Girl, but in other rigs they won't be, or they may not be rather. We just want to disable them for now, and now you see that we can click on the geometry. Earlier on we couldn't quite click on it. Now I'm just going to grab legs and arms and even the head, why not? And if you click onto the channel box tab and go down to the display layer section, you can make a new layer and store these elements in there. I will just call this thing geo, hidden geo, why not? There you go. And now I will just hide it. Maybe this guy as well. Let's add it. And then finally there is this strap geo group which we also want to add. So right click, add select. Now as I press play, there you go, I have a skeleton running. Maybe we want the teeth and the mouth and the tongue to just be hidden as well, but we certainly want to see the hips area. That's useful to us. So the problem is that the hips area is a single part with the legs, so we have to do some magic there. And if we right click on the geometry and go face, and if we right click and hold onto the geometry and go on to face, we can now select faces. And I will select one face at the very bottom of the legs and then double click on the next one that will select an edge. I will do the same on the opposite side. And now if I hit Shift and greater than keys, you see that I can increase the selection until I get to the waist area. It's a good idea to save this selection. So let's go create, set, quick selection set. I'm going to call this thing legs and I'm going to add it to the shelf. This way I will have a selection set down here, which I can right click on and click on select members, or on the shelf I have a button that selects the legs and I can hide that stuff. That means that the geometry at the hips does not need to be on the hidden geo anymore, so I will just remove the selected object. So there you go. So now with this on, I can check the movement of the body alone and I can finally spline it. So let's grab the up and downs first. Let's start from the very beginning, and you see they're set linear right now. So I'm going to set them to auto, and maybe I can just keep the motion a bit smoother in general, because you see that these curves are a little bit wonky there. They're a bit wobbly, so maybe we'll just grab both keys and just change them a little bit just to give me a tiny bit of motion there. As you see, I have no animated rotation on the main control, on the body control. I don't really need that. Now as I press play, the up and down seems about fine. If you're unsure on what you're doing in here, maybe one thing that you can do is create the usual sphere, which we learned to love. We're just going to match the transformation of the sphere to the one of the body controls. So select the sphere first, the body control last, modify, match transforms, all. And then we just scale the sphere up, there you go, and make it red, as we are used to by now. If you want to see the motion of the sphere, you just select the body control first, the sphere next, you go constraint parent. Now as you press play, you can check if the sphere is bouncing in any meaningful way that you like. Then we are going to check the hip instead, and we're going to, again, you see it's in linear, so auto tangents to begin with. Now let's try and make sense of those. So this curve in here is an interesting one. It's the side-to-side translation of the hip. So it kind of makes sense that the hip translates from one side to another, to be honest, but this is a bit strange. It goes one way and then it comes back immediately and then it stays flat. If I zero it out, you see the motion is minimal, so really it's not really contributing much to the motion. But one thing that I can do, maybe as I go from contact to down in here, I move this onto the leg which is holding the weight, which makes sense. This is what is going on, and instead of coming back immediately afterwards, maybe I can stay there a little bit more. So this one I don't need, and that means that on the opposite side, this key will be up here somewhere. In fact, I can grab the value that I have on the pose I am right now and then paste it there just before the other contact with the inverted value. There you go. And remember, I do not need this value. So I will have now the hip translating to the left ever so slightly, staying there, and as we approach the next contact, the hip swings to the opposite leg, which kind of makes sense. Now if you're going to see the post-cycle and pre-cycle infinity, you see that the curve is looking a bit funky there. You see it goes down, stops, and accelerates again. You really have to make sure that for whichever curve you're working with, you make sure that the tangents create a nice and smooth transition to the next curve. And that's true for any control we have in this loop. If we grab, for instance, the rotation channels of this hip and we go post-infinity cycle and pre-infinity cycle, you see, for instance, that in here the curve stops and starts again at the beginning of the loop. That's going to create a bit of a jitter, so we're going to just rotate the tangents to begin with so that they work nicely together. Then let's have a look at the other curves. So the X curve is moving very little, virtually nothing, so this seems to have a negligible effect. However, one of the most important rotation curves of the hips is the Y one in this particular rig. So this kind of swing is really important because it lets you remember extend the legs forward and backward without creating possibly excessive stretch in the leg. So we want to see what happens. So after the contact, the hip is winging backward. That's exactly what it should be doing. So we are fine in there. Maybe we can swing backward faster. So I can just delete that key and you see that the curve becomes a little bit more continuous there. There you go. And then as we approach the down, we start inverting the swing because the leg which was behind, this one, the right one in this case, starts to swing forward. So it kind of makes sense. We could maybe delay it a little bit, but it's a quick run, so maybe we can keep it that way. There you go. And then finally, this one is a bit interesting, but there is a reason for it. So in practice, as we land on the right foot, the right leg will stand straight and it will push up the hip on the right hand side of the screen at this current viewport, that is. That means that this curve does make sense. Then of course, as we move the right foot to the back, the hip will swing back down a little bit. And then as the left leg goes down towards the contact, the hip will rotate down towards the contact to enable that contact. So this all makes sense, although it looks a bit funky, so I'm not going to touch it. A sphere makes it harder, in fact, to evaluate everything we need on this, so maybe I will just elongate it as much as I can, and that should give me a better idea of the rotations. But you see it doesn't rotate at all. The reason why it doesn't rotate at all is because remember we constrained it to the body control, not to the hips. So now we can maybe change this constraint and we can in fact go under the sphere, delete the constraint, then go grab the sphere, the hips, and just go modify, match translation, and again match rotation. And then the hip is going to be the master, so we're going to select it first, then the sphere, then we're going to go constraint, parent, and now as we press play, you see that we can evaluate the motion. And the motion makes sense, it's nice and clean. There you go. We can have a look at the chest in there. Let's have a look at the curves. It seems about fine, but let's have a look at the curves anyway, because they are not splined at the end of the day. So we're going to auto-tangent them. The most important curve is definitely, in this case, the Y one, this kind of swing parallel to the floor. That's the most important curve, in my opinion, in a locomotion like the run. So we will expect to have a curve that is very similar to the one of the hip, but opposing its motion. And in fact, you see when the hip goes in one direction, then the chest moves in the opposite direction, which does make sense considering that the legs are opposing the swinging of the arms. Just like I simplified the curves on the hips earlier on, I can maybe delete this key and just keep the curve simple and smoother, and do the same, remember, on the opposite side. And then maybe you want to check if deleting this key makes any difference, and it does make quite some difference. So I will just smoothen that curve. In Maya 2022, if you're using it, you will find out that the auto tangents will align themselves a lot better with the existing curve, so you will have to do much less of this hand tweaking of the tangents, which frankly speaking doesn't make much sense. So there you go. And in here we have the forward and backward, which we introduced earlier on. We have a bit of forward and backward motion there, but it doesn't bother me and it's hardly visible. And then we have the Z action, which we're going to see because it's a bit interesting in here, because it goes down, then it sort of plateaus, and then it moves down again. So I want to see, first of all, what's the range of motion? That is, if I zero out this key by inputting 0 in here, how much does this change the animation? And it changes a little, but enough to be noticeable, I want to delete this key and just see what happens. I think I kind of prefer if the curve is cleaner there. So we'll just have the pelvis rotate a bit more naturally and cleanly. There you go. If I wanted, in fact, I could have pushed the chest down quite a lot more on the contact, but then I should have had to counter translate it. And in fact, if I was doing visual effects or creature animation, I would probably investigate that. But in this case, we are going for a fairly simplified run, so I'm not going to touch it. There you go, it looks quite clean, and now that we have it, we can progress with the splining. At this stage, I can delete the sphere and bring back the visibility for the legs and all the other parts that I have hidden, and go on splining in the rest of the body. So I guess I can go into the graph editor and see if my best friend, the Euler filter, is doing magic. So curves, Euler filter, and you see it is indeed doing magic. You still have to check if that's what you want really, because maybe from the front view, that tip is a bit too much on the inside. So maybe I can straighten it a little bit and maybe keep the leg open just until the contact. The same thing for the opposite leg. There you go. So that the contact won't only be down, but it will also be down and center if you think of it. There you go. Now I want to check the general motion, and the character is running quite okay. Let's see what happens if we make it run forever and ever, even with the rest of the limbs. So I will select all of the controls except for the master, go into the graph editor and select all curves, go curves, post infinity, cycle. I want this to loop forever and ever. Let's see it under view infinity, it's there. So now if I grab any given control, you see that the loops work just fine. Now these tangents are only in linear. I don't really need them to be in linear anymore. I don't even remember when I set them to linear. I thought I only did the foot in linear. So we'll select all controls except for the feet, because the feet, at least when they translate, they have to be in linear, and convert all these tangents to auto. That should give me a nice smooth action, which indeed happens. Now if I make the timeline a lot longer, you see that the character runs forever and ever and ever and ever forward. In fact, I would say that while the head looked okay when the character was running on the spot, the head now looks a bit too stable. And this is why you shouldn't really be spending too long on running on the spot, because you also have to check how does it look like when we see this animation from outside. Again, if this is a video game in which the camera is always attached to the character, then maybe you could have kept that version in which the character ran on the spot and it looked okay. But if your character needs to be seen from the distance, then this head looks a bit too stable if you think of it. Actually, quite a lot. So I think we want to go back and fix that. A cheap way to prevent the character from running forward is to go to frame 1, select the master, right click on any given channel of the master and go mute all. Now the control won't be playing the animation. There will still be animation, you're not deleting it, but it won't be played. And in here you can see that the head, now that we look at it again, when we are up close, is quite okay. And in fact, if this was a close-up shot of the character running, I would kind of like to have the head stable, because this way I could read the expressions. But in practice, the further I go and the excessive the stabilization is. So you see, depending on the shot you're catering for, one animation may work or may work a little bit less effectively. So I will maybe reduce the counter animation on the translation of the head. So I'm going to go into the graph editor first of all and identify which axis is going to cause that. And that looks like the y-axis. If you want to quickly filter the graph editor to only show the curves you need to play with, you can go under channels and in there you will find sync graph editor display. There you go, this guy. And I will enable it. And the beauty of it is that now as I click on translate y, I will only see translate y in the graph editor. Be careful guys, because it may lead to some confusion sometimes, so you want to be careful with that. Similarly, with sync timeline display in the channel box, I can enable it, and now whenever I click on this box, I'm only seeing the key that is belonging to that channel in the timeline. Again, be careful, it's very easy to forget you have that on. So again, translate y is our curve. Let's see what's the effect of the curve. So as the body goes down, you see that the head goes up. And as the body goes up, you see that the head goes down. If I wanted to reduce this effect in a smart way, maybe I could find a middle pose where the neck looks more or less at the correct length, like this one. This value 0.104 seems to be an okay value. And then I can grab all the keys of the translate Y, and maybe I could scale them, right, around this value. If I hit R,
and I hold down Shift, the middle mouse button, there you go. You see I can scale them down. Again, though, it would be nice to have a preview, so maybe I can go to a place where I have a peak of the motion, and then in the graph editor I can go under Edit, Scale Options, and I want to scale proportionally. So the scaling works this way. Let me reset it. The value scale indicates how much you want to scale this value. So let's say we want to reduce the counter animation by, say, 20%. I'm going to input there .8, and Maya is going to scale the animation by 80%, thus taking away 20%. But from which pivot are we going to scale? Because the problem here is that I could scale it from this point, or I could scale it from the bottom, for instance. So where should I scale it from? I said I want to scale it from that value that I identified earlier on. So in the value pivot box, so the first one is the scale, the second is the pivot, I'm going to paste the value that I liked. I'm going to position my cursor on the peak of the translation there, and then I'm going to reduce by 20% by hitting apply. You see that now I can press play and see the result from the distance. That's better. And I can hit apply again. And the more I hit apply, and the more the head will go up and down. That's it. And this way you can tune the counter animation any way you like. It's quite cool. And in fact, very often in production, you will be told, hey, can you reduce that by 20%? And that's a good way to do it, in my opinion. So now I can look at the character again running through the screen and see if that's still too little in terms of up and down. And I think that now the head looks a lot more believable. It's still stable, you see, but it's a lot more believable. And I can go forever and ever, and just as I press play, maybe I can make the timeline a little bit longer to evaluate a bit better different distances. So now I would probably need another monitor in here to demonstrate that. But now I can grab these guys, and maybe I can scale everything from nearly 0 there now. And if I grab all of these keys, as the character runs through screen, I can apply, and you say, oh, I'm picking the wrong channel. Now she's running and rotating the head over and over. Remember, I only need one channel there. There you go. So I can reduce that and introduce a bit more up and down. There may be something to say about the chest as well. So I can maybe grab, remember the chest was also counter animating quite a lot. So let's see which channel of the chest was causing the issue. That seems to be translate Y again. So maybe I can grab again the chest. This time around I will scale around the value of 0, I think, because 0 is the default pose that I don't need to change. I will reduce it by a bigger amount so that you can tell the difference. So if I reduce it by 80%, so I type in .2 in the scale, see how much it changes stuff. And now I trust the head will go up and down a little bit more. So these are ways you could do, and you see now you actually see the head going up and down. So these are ways in which you can control the animation by scaling numerically and progressively see the effect. It's quite useful in fact. Of course, it tends to work better if you devise your animation with a logic. So for instance, if you're counter animating the ups and downs in some fashion, then you should always use the same control and the same axis to do that, so that you only need to scale those controls and those axes. So that's our animation in there. I think it already works, but we can maybe go in there and spline it a little bit. So I will mute the master again. The arm is working quite okay. The legs are not so cool. Let's have a look at what they do. So we'll grab the foot. Remember, we only need to clean the loop itself. So the foot goes down. So for instance, after contacting the floor on the second frame, I think I could roll nearly flat. Actually, I can roll entirely flat and maybe just keep up the toe. There you go. And this will give me a bit more time on the floor. And I will try to have frame 4 roll down as well, just to give the impression that I spend more time on the floor. And then I have a little bit of a problem because between 4 and 5, there is plenty of roll going on. You see the heel lifts up quite a lot. And then there is almost nothing going on. So maybe I can cheat a little bit and lift up frame 6. See, I don't have a key in there because I have selected the foot roll and I was thinking timeline and graph editor. If you go and check the translations, you will see the key. So this is the risk of having sync, graph editor and timeline on. It's very easy when you forget to think you have put a key and not have it visible on screen, and you're thinking, why not? I just made a key in there. So I go in there, lift the foot a little bit better, and then you see that we don't lift nearly as quickly as we should, so maybe we can lift a little bit quicker there. And then if you track the arc of the heel in there, I'm going to show you the arc. You will find there's a very hard corner somewhere. up here, you see, it feels almost like the heel is hitting an invisible ceiling and then moves forward, bounces forward. So maybe in here I can have a look at the curves. I don't want to really set a key every frame, although for the feet, it's not common for the lift off to set a bunch of keys. So the feet right now are still in linear. I want them to become auto tangents the moment they lift off the floor. They just need to be linear for as long as they are on the floor. So when I get down to the contact there, I will go back to linear. But until then, I want the curves to be nice auto tangents. There you go. That's going to be already working a little bit better. Now let's have a look at that infamous wall. Let's see what the Z is doing. You see the Z is moving forward, so maybe I could just delete the movement forward, and that is already improving. You see the arc, and then maybe at 11 I can lift up a little bit and then delay the tip. I mean, I could even cheat, why not, and just use the toe wiggle there to increase the delay, and that would give me, you see, a much nicer arc. There is a little bit of indecision there because it feels like between 9 and 10 the tip is rotating forward and then rotates back again. So I wonder what is going on in there. It might be again a gift of the gimbal lock. So let's select rotation values and just run an Euler filter again. You see it was indeed a gift of the gimbal lock. So now you see we have a much nicer arc down there, and there is a very strong variation of motion between 15 and 16. You see that we go there very quickly and then bam, we change direction very quickly as well. So maybe we want to do something about that as well. I take it that's translate Z again. Let's see, it is. So maybe I could reduce the amount of translation that we have forward in there. There you go. And that starts to look okay, I guess. Maybe I could lift up even quicker and indulge a little bit longer up in the air. Remember, we are syncing the timeline there. There you go. If you want to check the motion a bit better, just like in my other tutorials, you can create the proverbial, almost proverbial, I would say, red sphere. And then you snap it to your foot using the modify match transformations translation and rotation, not that it matters really. And then the control of the foot becomes the master. The sphere, which we'll have to select, becomes the slave, and we do a parent constraint. And this means that now we can go visualize and ghost the sphere. You see that now you can see the motion a little bit better. In fact, probably ghosting doesn't work too well for me right now, so I will check. And that makes it a lot easier to assess any inconsistency in the arc. That's good. I think this works. So now the foot goes down, lifts up, and then changes the motion and then goes down again. Maybe on frame 16 I can delay the way down a little bit so that the strongest motion on the way down will be between 16 and the beginning of the motion. Not bad. Now once you're done with this, you can hide or delete the sphere. And you would want to do the same thing on the opposite side, right? But now you have way more poses to mirror, not to mention that you would have to tweak the curves. So maybe one thing that we can do is, first of all, tweak the curves for that foot in there. And you see that translate X, for instance, is a bit linear the moment we are again in the air. So I want to make sure that it goes back to round there. And maybe I want this to be flat there so that it's a bit nicer with the connection with the next part of the loop. Similarly, the rotation, you want to connect nice and smooth with the loop. So you want to make sure that you don't connect with the loop in a way which is a bit too harsh. There you go, something like this will work. Once you have your curves clean, it's time to flop the animation on the opposite side. So I'm going to do it for this foot, but the same thing is applicable to any control. So I'm going to go between 1 and 17. And I'm going to copy the keys in there. Then I'm going to grab the left foot, delete everything. I know it's sad, but we have to do it. And we paste the animation. Now the 2 feet will move together. See that? It's no longer a run, it's a jump with both feet, which we probably want to set to infinity before and after, so pre and post infinity for all the curves. Now they will jump together. There you go, that's our animation there. She's sad. I mean, no wonder. I would be sad if I had to run that way. So now we have the animation, but you see that we kind of need to mirror it. So we need to understand which values need mirroring. In practice, you will want a tool to do it. And again, as I said multiple times, Animbot does it. But let's say that we are left to our own devices. So if I move this foot on local to the left of the grid as we are looking at it now, and the values go to positive, and to get the symmetric pose on the other foot, the value go the opposite way to negative, like they do in here, then it means that you have to mirror those values. Similarly, if I go up with Z and the value is going to positive like it is up here in the channel box, and I do the same with this guy, well, if the values are moving in the right direction, you don't need to mirror. If I go instead on Y, that's Y negative because the value is decreasing. Let's see what happens if I go forward. Value is decreasing. It seems to me that we only need to mirror translate X on the translations. And then let's check the rotation. You need to be in gimbal axis, so hold down E, left mouse button, gimbal. To evaluate which rotation axes need mirroring, it's better to do it when you are flat on the floor. So let's see. If I rotate in gimbal, say parallel to the axis, and they both go in the same direction, that axis needs mirroring, because it means that I need to rotate it the opposite direction to get a symmetric pose. So one will go plus, one will go minus. So Y rotation needs mirroring. This does not need mirroring, right? It works just the same. And Z definitely needs mirroring. So translate X, rotate Y and Z. So let's go grab all the curves for the left foot. And remember, we are syncing the graph editor. So we said translate X, hold down Control or Command if you're on a Mac to select the rotate Y and Z that we said we needed mirroring for. Then we grab these values and we will need to invert them, right? From plus to minus or the other way around. The easy way is to select them all, go Scale, Options, Reset Settings, and the value scale is -1. If we multiply any number by -1, we're going to get the opposite, and the pivot is going to be 0. That's the default position. We hit scale, and now you see that they are perfectly mirrored. It's still a run, but now they are perfectly symmetrical. Nice. Now the problem is that they will be offset, right? But we know that frame 9 really is the opposite of frame 1. So if we manage to put frame 1 over to 9, we should be done. I will make sure I don't filter the selection, so I grab all the keys on the timeline. So I click out and you see there's no channel selected. Then I grab the whole timeline, and with the middle mouse button, I'm going to grab the middle 2 yellow markers there and hold and drag until frame 1 goes over to 9. I made this control pre-cycle infinite, right? So it's going to run even after that. And now you see that the run works pretty well, the feet are super clean, and we successfully cleaned the animation there. Not too bad indeed. Similarly, you could go around and check the rotation, Y for instance of the chest, and maybe you don't want this bump in there, you can delete it on both sides of the loop. There you go. Just to keep the animation a little bit cleaner, the spline a little bit cleaner. Whenever you want to delete a key, it's a good idea to make sure to position yourself on that key as you delete it so that you will see what's the actual change in the animation. You don't want to blindly delete keys. So now let's have a look at the rotation of this arm. I will Euler filter it just for safety, and I will check what happens there. To be honest, that rotation looks pretty clean already. Let me check the opposite. I think in here that the elbow, in here is being a bit mischievous. Let's have a look. Yeah, maybe it's not too bad, but maybe as it moves forward, right now it's locking. I could keep it moving forward a little bit. So you see, this is the curve I'm using, the Y axis. So maybe I can grab this key, and by moving it down, I keep the elbow sliding forward. There you go, something like this. There you go, and in fact, it's a bit softer now. I like it more. Now I could just do the same in here and duplicate it, but really, I kind of know what to do, so I will go to... This doesn't look mirrored. It doesn't look like the same curve. Let's have a look. It's not. So now that I know it's not, I can do the same game, and that's a good way for us to practice again. So I'm going to duplicate the keys of the arm. So copy. I'm going to grab the other arm, left one, delete the keys and go paste. And then I'm going to move 1 over to 9. Then I'm going to select the whole animation, middle mouse drag it so that frame 1 becomes 9. And then curves, post infinity, cycle, pre-infinity, cycle. You want to check which curves you need to mirror. And let's have a look. So X seems to work just fine. Y is moving the arm forward, and Z is giving you a symmetric pose. So if when you operate gimbal, every rotation you make gives you a symmetric pose, it means you don't have to mirror anything. That's our lucky day. So now, there you go, even the left arm is a bit nicer. That's cool. That is actually quite nice. There you go. So now we have it. We don't need the motion trail handle anymore, and I can hit save. This is going to be splining, right? So I'm going to hit save here. And maybe I can add a little bit of reaction to the up and down in there. Let's see if I can do it. Grab the head, create a layer. I don't want to touch my animation just now. Set a key on frame 1. And as the character goes down, I'm going to delay the nose on the way up a little bit. There you go. Now on frame 3, the character touches the ground, the body stops going down. So I expect that the head will receive a little bit of a hit there. So I will create that sense of hitting. Then maybe at frame 9, I will zero out again. And then I will start over and again delay between 9 and 11. And at 5, create a little bit of a sense of a hit. If you want it to be ultra precise, you could just duplicate the poses, remember. But right now, I think we will be fine. Remember, at 17, you want to go back to 0. Now let's press play on this animation. Let's see if it looks a little bit more realistic. And I kind of like it. I could make it more exaggerated just to maybe demonstrate it a bit better. Let's see if I manage to. So I will delay quite a lot more. There you go. That's a visible delay. Then I will go down quite a lot more. And the same thing, you want to track the position of the nose. The nose cannot be higher on 11 than it was on frame 9, of course. Now, as I press play, you see that I have the reaction of the girl. If it's too strong, you can just go grab the weight of the layer and reduce the weight so that you will still have the reaction, but it will be considerably less. That's one of the beauties of animation layers. If you want to learn more about animation layer, you can watch my YouTube tutorial. You will find the link in the description of the video. So this is a good way to quickly add a bit of overlapping motion. In general, at this stage, you will have different issues than mine. You will have to fix different parts, but the logic stays the same. Let's say we just fix the right elbow. We double click on the timeline, copy the keys, go on the opposite side, grab the other elbow, delete the keys on the opposite elbow, paste the keys. We know that these rotations don't need to be mirrored because we tested earlier on the shoulder, and then grab all the keys and offset them until the frame we used to have on 1 becomes 9. Make sure that your animation is looping, is cycling before and after in infinity. Now as I press play, there you go, the elbow works. It's a bit hard on the way down, so maybe I can delay the rotation of the wrist. And if I wanted to delay the rotation at frame 3 now with this forearm in particular, I would have to find a place where there is a key, otherwise you're going to edit infinite, you don't want to do that. So I will delay it here, and maybe in here again, I want to keep the wrist delayed. And now I should get, you see, a bit of a softer motion on the way back. So this is magic of overlap, I guess. I'm still not very happy about the rotation of the wrist in there. And there you go, we have our animation. It works okay, it's splined. We didn't spend too much time splining the controls, they were okay. One thing you definitely want to check is IK pops. You don't want the legs to stretch, so I'm going to go frame by frame, you see. Just make sure that we don't have sudden stretch in the legs. And there's a bit of a pop in here in the left knee. So if I go and grab the left foot control, you can see how the knee moves a little bit forward, then accelerates quite a lot, accelerates, then accelerates even more, and then a lot more, and then the next frame is changing direction. That's a bit strange. So I think in here, one trick that you can play is to go to frame 22 and trying to keep the same pose of the foot more or less, but lower it a little bit so that the knee won't lift that much and the inversion in the next frame will be gentler. Similarly, of course, on the opposite side, this mega movement forward, we're going to lower the leg quite a lot so that the transition will be a lot softer. You see now the knees are working a lot nicer. Still feel like I could hit the ground with the feet flatter a bit earlier because I feel we don't spend enough time on the floor. So I will animate the toe wiggle to keep the foot a bit flatter. There you go, that looks a bit better. And that's it. That's our Japan-inspired female run in action. Thank you very much for following the course. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If that's the case, please consider leaving a review and even suggesting improvements. That will really help me develop more and better content. Where should we go from here as someone learning animation? My suggestion would be to animate a different run
based on different references. If you haven't animated a walk, I suggest you do so as well. And once you master both runs and walk cycles, it will be time to learn to animate transitions between the two, so that you increase your understanding of body mechanics. If you're interested in more animation tutorials, please check my other courses on this platform as well as my YouTube channel. And remember, luck helps those who prepare.